I'd like to welcome everybody to our post-show discussion. My name is Jamie Kneen. I'm with MiningWatch Canada, based in Ottawa. I'm the Outreach and Communications Coordinator with MiningWatch. And now that we've all had a chance to watch The Shadow of Gold, I'd like to bring you a group of correspondents from around the northern BC, Alaska, Yukon, and Nunavut. And we will have a quick round of questions for these folks and get them to check in from their territories, and then we'll turn it over to you, the audience, for your questions and really try and provoke an open discussion. So as we go along, please introduce yourselves in the chat at the side of your screen and say hi. And if you have questions, anything that occurred to you, anything that comes out of watching the film, anything that really struck you, you can start asking questions now, or you can ask questions as we go along. So just type those into the chat box, and if you want to direct your questions to any one of us in particular, then please do so. Just indicate that when you write the question. And if you think someone's asking a really good question, you can just add your thumbs up or a plus sign along with it, and you can mention who's asking the question and which question you thought was great, or you can just add a little sign. I can repeat that later on, but that's basically how we're going to do things. And I will be getting the questions from the chat and feeding them back to our correspondents here. So with us today, we have Robert Lang, who's the co-director of The Shadow of Gold. He's a film producer, director, and writer based in Toronto. And let's see, I won't say too much about him. I don't want to use up too much time, other than that he started off a long time ago working with the NFB before he set up his current production company, and he's done a lot of work on educational films and documentaries. And this is one of the most recent projects. We have also Bev Sellars, who's the former chief of Xat'sull First Nation in BC, near Williams Lake. And she was actually chief at the time of the Mount Polly disaster in 2014. And so she was up close and personal with that. And that was a copper gold mine that became the largest environmental disaster in Canadian history. She's also the author of the award-winning book, They Called Me Number One, Secrets and Survival at an Indian Residential School, which describes her experience within the Canadian Indian residential school system. We have NIKKI SKUCE, who is an activist, researcher, organizer with the Northern Confluence influence in Smithers, BC. She's been deeply involved in struggles for environmental justice in the forests and watersheds of northern BC for many years. We have also HILU TAGOONA, who is an Inuk from the geographic center of Canada, Baker Lake, Nunavut. And while in her backyard, the proposed Kikivik uranium mine, which was supposed to be in the calving grounds of the two main caribou herds of the Eastern Arctic, has been rejected twice. That area is now home to not the caribou calving grounds, but the area of the Eastern Nunavut is now the home to two producing gold mines. FREDERICK OLSEN Jr. is the newly appointed executive director of the Southeast Alaska Indigenous Transboundary Commission in Sitka, Alaska. And the commission and folks in that area are very concerned about the gold mines that are being developed upstream on the major rivers of northwestern BC that flow out through the Alaska Panhandle. We were talking earlier, he summed it up nicely. He said that living downstream is an uphill battle. We also have Louis Rifkind, who is the mining analyst for the Yukon Conservation Society in Whitehorse, Yukon. He has a background in civil engineering, and he's a researcher who is, I think, well equipped to take on the Yukon government's mineral development strategy that they're in the midst of putting together. I have to point out that we had advertised that Kevin O'Reilly, who's the member of the Legislative Assembly for Frame Lake and Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories, was supposed to join us. He's unable to join us, and we were hoping to have someone take his place from the Dene Nation office in Yellowknife, and that didn't work out. So apologies for the false advertising. Kevin sends his regrets, and I'm sure we'll be able to plug him in. He'll be quite interested to know how our discussions come out today. So, Bob, would you like to talk a little bit about the film itself?
Sure. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Okay. Hi. Thanks, Jamie. I'm the producer, co-director on the film. It's I hope everybody had a chance to see it. It's a feature doc. We also did a two-part as well for international broadcast on Arte in France and Germany, and here on TV Ontario. A different film, but or different two-parter than this, but more or less covers the same territory. It's the third film of the international approach to global commodities. I did a film a number of years ago called Diamond Road that was about the diamond industry, also filming around the world and in northern Canada. And we also did a different kind of commodity called raw opium, about the opium trade and the failure of the war on drugs. So these are big, sprawling kind of international productions, but we try to do them by telling stories of different people on the pipeline of each of these commodities, in this case, gold. It required a lot of collaboration, as you can imagine, with teams of people in different parts of the world. It actually prepared us quite well for the era of COVID, even though it was shot 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. Because these days it's very hard to travel internationally and make documentaries in different parts of the world. But in this case, we did it for a different reason. It wasn't COVID. We did it for language and cultural reasons. So we worked with a crew, a very good crew in China to do the scenes with the Chinese miner. First of all, language would have been a problem if we had just gone over there. But SKUCE, in terms of our presence there and trying to get into mines, which were kind of difficult, even for the local filmmakers to get access to. And in DRC as well, the Democratic Republic of Congo, we also had a local crew, relatively local crew from Uganda who just came across the border to the Eastern Congo. And then it was a co-production with a partner, Sally Blake in France. So we were working with teams of people around the world to make this film, and it was quite a challenge. And still to try and keep some intimacy to the storytelling, keeping the characters and the individual stories of different parts of the world intact and weave them in a way that had some continuity and gave a picture of what the global gold mining and extractive sector was all about. So I hope we succeeded in that, but we now have we had a plan to screen these across the country. We did 5 or 6, I guess we did 6 screenings last year in theaters in major centers across Canada. And we had intended to take the film to smaller mine-affected communities in different parts of the country this year. But with COVID, we're now having to pivot, as they say, and do these screenings and panel discussions like this electronically, virtually. And this is the first of those. So welcome and thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to a really good, interesting, diverse discussion about the interests, the Canadian particularities of gold mining and the effects on gold mining on different communities in Canada. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to just remind people again to look at the chat box in your Eventive window and look at think about maybe saying hi, say where you're from, introduce yourself a little bit, just briefly. And that's also where we're hoping people will post questions. And if you've got questions now, or if questions come to your mind as we talk, then please type them in and we'll pass them on to our group here. You can also vote up questions by posting a thumbs up or a plus sign. So I want to talk a little bit just about why we're doing this. You know, it's not just because we've got a cool documentary and it's really interesting and we thought it was worth people having a look at it and continuing to discuss it, although that's certainly true. But there's particular reasons, and that is really that this isn't a historic thing. It doesn't serve a curiosity. It's something that's still going on. It's something that is happening as we speak. Gold continues to be one of the main metals mined in Canada and around the world. Canadian mining companies are in the forefront of gold mining in many parts of the world. They're in every continent except Antarctica, and I'm sure they'd love to be there if they could. But you know, this is part of Canada's role in the world, and it's also a big part of the global economy. There are hundreds of large-scale mines and literally millions of small-scale artisanal miners digging for gold around the world as we speak. But during the pandemic, well, actually, that's even continued because gold mines have been deemed essential services during the pandemic, not just in Canada, but elsewhere. And really, it's only been under severe duress that some of these operations have closed down or had to scale back their operations to try and protect workers and the community. So that's actually been a big struggle for us over the last couple of months, is trying to help communities and draw attention to this and pressure the industry and pressure governments to act to protect health, protect workers, protect the communities from the pandemic, and not allow mining operations and mine workers moving in and out of shift work to spread the virus even more. But that's, in a way, that's sort of typical of the way the industry operates, that the costs of gold mining are externalized to communities, to the watersheds, to the workers. Well, really only about 10% of the gold that's mined is actually used for anything useful, like electronics. So the other 90% of gold that's mined goes to luxury markets, so jewelry, it goes to financial investment, and it goes to central banks' currency reserves. And the irony has been pointed out that most gold, therefore, having been extracted from the earth at great effort and great cost, is basically just buried again, only this time in the bank vaults. So the pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis, has driven gold prices to an 8-year high. There is an unprecedented demand for gold as an investment product, and we're not sure what the effects of this are really. So that's why we wanted to have this conversation today, to see what is happening, what happens out of all of this. And how does this, how does what we've learned from the film or the kinds of things that were exposed in the film help us understand what's going on? How has gold mining affected your community, your environment, and what can be done about it? So on that note, I'd like to turn to our correspondents across the one corner of the continent anyway, and ask you really what struck you most about the film, just briefly. And maybe I'll just start with the order that people are on my screen. So Lewis, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that, Jamie. Yeah, the thing that struck me most about the film, and I mean, it's a very good film, but the personal stories, both good and bad, we tend to forget that, I mean, while it's very easy to yell and scream at large multinational corporations, we're dealing with Newmont having a proposed mine in the Yukon here, or the lack of regulatory oversight by governments that are either incompetent or don't care. It's individuals that are at the heart of it. And there are some very sad stories, as was shown in the film, but there also can be some individuals or groups of people who can leverage gold extraction to better their lives, as was shown in the Women's Cooperative towards the end of the film. I found that very interesting. One of the things in the Yukon, at least, is that gold mining is a form of sort of wealth creation for some individuals who don't have access to much else, given the nature of the way our society is set up. And the key is to try and do it in such a manner that it's not environmentally destructive and it's not socially destructive as well. And it's very tricky to do. I would argue in a Yukon context, almost impossible. And it was very interesting to see in the film that at least there was one example of a group of people coming together in a cooperative and trying to overcome those hurdles and from what it looked like, making it work. That's it for me.
Thanks. HILU, how about you?
Thank you. A couple of reflections. One definitely was like thinking about Inuit as a people within the last, less than 100 years, being able to rely on everything that's right around you environmentally to sustain ourselves, and then becoming, part of this consumer world and our responsibility. And I feel like the film gave me more strength in my voice to be able to say, like, we're responsible as consumers to know where we're getting gold and many other products and commodities. I also, watching the conflicts on there, it had me reflecting on, although it's not of the same nature, we are also a very community-oriented people traditionally, and help each other a lot in within our communities when there's things happening, whether good or bad. And I've been reflecting, after watching this, I was reflecting on, after seeing the unimaginable conflict in Congo and other places, how conflict, even though it's often unseen within our Indigenous communities, that there are impacts to the communities, whether it be between political bodies that are, should be working together, whether it be in organizations with our Hamlet Council or other organizations, that there's, I guess, pervasive conflict that tends to occur and it doesn't just go away. Tensions arise, and it's been seen even familial conflicts that occur, and many have internal conflicts as well, and you see the shifts happening, like even right to the last minute during the regulatory processes. So I feel like that has affected our communities, even with COVID and the decisions that have had to be made for the mines that are close to our communities. There's conflicts occurring even then. So it kind of had me reflecting on that, and I guess I hadn't looked at it in big picture before. So I thank you for that, Bob and team.
That's great. Thank you, HILU. Bev, over to you.
Thank you. In the film, my daughter Jacinda Mack is in there, and she says something like, for them to be so rich, there has to be so many who have to be poor. And that sentence there, the thing that makes me angriest in the film was that governments and resource companies, they always use our poverty against us. And then some people develop a fatalistic attitude, just trying to survive and provide for our families, and that really makes me angry. As HILU said, that it creates a divide in the communities. Some of our people work in the mines and are paid good money, and so become the champions of the mine. But as the mother, in the film is told not to say anything, but she's scared of losing a second son to the lung disease, and that's really heartbreaking. And that transfers to our communities as well. And the doctor in the film says, all the gold in the world is not worth your health, but we keep on committing slow suicide by allowing the real economy, the natural economy, to be destroyed by a small percentage of people. And it was interesting, Premier Christy Clark said, if you can't get the resources out of the ground, you are going to imperil the future of our entire province. And to her, I would reply, if you continue thinking in this destructive way, you are killing the future of our children and our grandchildren. So it's kind of ironic that all of these people buying gold and hoarding it underground or in their banks or wherever, hoarding it to survive in times of need, are in reality helping this to destroy the very economy, the real economy that we need to survive, and that involves water and food. So in the film, it shows the clash of cultures between those who worship gold and those who do not. They show Virginia City, which was known as the richest place on earth because of all the gold that was found there. And to me, places such as Haida Gwaii are the richest places on earth, and it has nothing to do with gold. It's rich in natural resources. So, you know, the poverty, like I think it was Bob Marley said, some people are so poor, all they have is money. And I think that's a true statement. So thankfully, people are becoming educated about this, but way more is needed. And the way small scale mining is being done without mercury is encouraging. So the poverty thing in the film is what hit me the most. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks for that. That was amazing. NIKKI, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I think, you know, I remember being shocked by the fact that 20 tons of mine waste is produced to make a single, you know, the average gold band ring that Bonnie talked about from Earthworks in the film. And just how, you know, the film is just a stark reminder with all those images of the massive industrial or the massive environmental impact of industrial mining, but also that all mining has an impact, whether artisanal or alluvial. And I don't think people are aware of the fact that, you know, of just how much waste is produced to mine some of these metals and minerals, and that waste has to go somewhere. It's a non-renewable resource, so those things are you know, dug up forever, and that we do have the need for this sort of water treatment in perpetuity. And I think, you know, the guy in Montana said one toxic spill would change the river forever. And I think that's really what's feared here in British Columbia and to our neighbors downstream, like in Alaska, which I'm sure Fred will bring up. And, you know, and that happened as illustrated in the film too, about with the Mount Polley disaster. And there was just recently a scientific study published showing that there are actually ongoing impacts in Quesnel Lake. And we're just not sure of what those long-term impacts are from that spill. And, you know, the fortunate thing about Mount Polley was that it didn't have acid mine drainage, but it had a bunch of other fun toxins in there. So none of it is benign. But I think just given the risks of tailings, not just from gold mining, but we also have a lot of copper and coal here in British Columbia that dominate here in British Columbia, that, you know, we need to be able to create no-go zones to minimize risk to our waters, to our rivers and our lakes, especially those with salmon in them. So I really appreciate, Bob, the films like this that help raise awareness about both the environmental and also the human costs that come with resource extraction.
That's great. Thanks very much. And now, Fred.
Hala. Kyuthgansi Hinudikyang. Place of one's own is my name in the Haida language. And of course, my name is Frederick Olsen Jr. And I'd like to thank MiningWatch Canada and especially the filmmakers of Shadow of Gold for this opportunity to talk about it. And I'm the executive director of Southeast Alaska Indigenous Transboundary Commission. And we're a coalition of 15 federally recognized tribes in Southeast Alaska. We're not a racial group. You know, we're working with the government-to-government relationship that our tribes have with the United States government. But we don't take any authority away from our individual tribes, of course. And, you know, like Jamie was saying, we are really facing an uphill battle by being downstream of some of the world's largest industrial mining projects now or ever that have ever been built. And it's one of the things that really struck me about the film is how, you know, it really emphasizes the romance and the emotion of gold, the religion of gold. And it's really striking because that's really hidden in a way for the companies because everybody kind of buys into it. You know, there's a price of gold. It's set every day, it fluctuates, there's markets. It's all established. But the indigenous emotion is, oh, those are stories and you're being spiritual. And it doesn't seem to have the same weight. It doesn't have the same value to folks. And that's one of the real problems. But it's real striking how one person's emotion is another person's established fact. And, you know, it's that lure of gold. And, you know, now everything's been so perfected. So if somebody has an idea, they can learn from others and really do things that have never been done before more efficiently or inefficiently, as we're seeing with gold mines. And, you know, when the price gets high enough, then things pan out. But, you know, this isn't your grandpa's, your great grandpa panning in the river for gold and finding a nugget and God bless you, you know, free money from God. You know, again, these are major industrial complexes. You know, they're really huge wastewater plants with a little gold mine attached. And size really, really does matter. And, you know, and as we're speaking, the Tulsequah Chief mine continues to pollute the Taku River watershed. And that's been, you know, going on since the 1950s when it was abandoned. Of course, it was polluting before it was abandoned. And that's a tiny little thing. And then you have Mount Poly, huge disaster, but again, nothing compared to a disaster that could happen from a Red Chris or, heaven forbid, a KSM mine. And so, but that's, you know, some of my initial reaction. And of course, you know, it's always touching. It's been a pleasure, an honor to meet Bev and Jacinda and, you know, interact with them at different conferences. And it's every time I think about them, it's hard to imagine what they've gone through. And if I think about some of the areas to our, say, Kasan, Haida people, or everybody has their areas, and you think about some of these areas, like if Carta River never had sockeye anymore, it's very hard to think about. And, you know, that's another maybe more, excuse me, more personal reaction to the movie, to the film. But it's all kind of personal, you know. Gold, it does that, good and bad.
Thank you for that. So let's turn it around again, and this time maybe make a brief comment about how you see things going forward. What's happening next in terms of gold mining in your territory, in terms of what needs to be done, what could happen, what do you want to have happen? And maybe I'll just turn it around and start with Frederick again.
I got to remember to unmute. Sorry. Yeah, thanks. No, it's amazing what happens. You know, it's such an overwhelming issue, and then you do everything right, and companies, I guess, are trying to do everything right, and they do these elaborate plans, and they have their environmental assessments and all this stuff. But then, oh, the dam breaches and it breaks, and oh, the stuff flows into Quesnel Lake. And so now guess what? We just use a pipe and pump the stuff directly into Quesnel Lake. Well, why even have the system? Let's just save time, right? And they should have just made those pipes go into the lake at the beginning. You know, well, that's, of course, hopefully that sounds absurd to people, but that's what's happened. You know, we have to really watch out when these elaborate plans fail, and then the pipe just goes into the lake anyway. You know, this is a dangerous area we're in. You know, the Auditor General had said business as usual should not continue after Mount Poly, but business as usual is in play. And, you know, we have to mention, it's going to come up at some point, you know, especially with the huge lakes of poison. They get, you know, swept under the rug and call it a tailings storage facility. But these massive lakes of poison, like the one at Red Chris, or that are designed for the KSM project, you know, Pebble Mine, these kinds of places, these passive water treatment plants or facilities need to be monitored forever, at least 200. This is not, you know, real estate hyperbole. These things need to be looked at for 200-300 years each minimum. And then who's going to do that? What mining companies 200 years old right now that's been around? You know, not a lot of any company's been around that long. And so then you think about, oh, the elephant in the room, climate change, right? Well, we're already seeing it. Only 1 year after Mount Poly's dam failure, they were up and running, and it almost happened again because what used to be a century storm is now happening every other year. And so the water level rose, and there was a fear. People came up to us, we were at a conference in Vancouver, and said, wow, have you heard? They were complimenting us because, like, as if we knew anything happening in Canada, but we of course don't. And they said, Mount Poly's going to breach again. And well, it didn't. So now that's swept under the rug. Oh, it didn't happen, nothing to see here. But my point is, who's going to be watching when Red Chris fails in the year 2225? You know, it's like the song. And so we need some things in place, and not financial assurances. We need actual boots on the ground. You know, we need some monitoring. We need some safety measures, you know, like you have life preservers on boats. You know, we need something for our people because we're the ones that are going to be there. You know, we live out in the middle of nowhere, and, you know, we're the ones that are going to get the risk. That's part of the thing of being downstream. You only get the dirty end of the stick. And so we have to look to our brothers and sisters, our neighbors across the border to work on this.
Right. Well, that, that goes upstream to you, Nikki.
Thanks. So basically, I think, you know, the BC government during the COVID crisis has acted really well in terms of keeping the majority of us, you know, the rates low and the majority of us, you know, safe. I think that people have been acting and making a lot of sacrifices, but it was quite alarming to see that mining was considered an essential service. And not so much mining, perhaps, in the sense of, you know, of course, I support having workers go out there, making sure that risks are minimized and that there's regular maintenance happening to protect our communities and watersheds. But the fact that that prospectors could go out trying to strike for gold, and in particular, and, you know, a lot of us, I live in a, you know, Wet'suwet'en territory in a small community, and, you know, we do have a hospital, but we don't, you know, there's one ventilator or whatever, if that. So it's sort of, you know, it's putting a lot of risk to small communities, a lot of Indigenous communities, all in kind of the name of again, striking it rich or going for gold. And it just really reflected to me back on the history. You know, the very foundation of British Columbia is from the gold rush, and the first act that was passed was the Mine Goldfields Act, which granted what was called a free entry certificate. And that free entry certificate from 1867 that was created to try to settle the West is still in existence. So you still have, you know, more, you know, it's kind of ridiculous. There's only about 17%, maybe a little bit more now, of British Columbia off limits to mining. And so I think definitely as gold prices go up, there's definitely more, probably more tenures being sold and more people out there trying to create change. So as part of that, as part of a, you know, one of the co-founders of the BC Mining Law Reform Campaign, our 3 priorities with this provincial government are trying to change legislation around that Mineral Tenure Act to stop making it so easy to be able to stake claims or to limit areas like around salmon watersheds, to try to improve tailings so that they're less risky, and also to ensure that the polluter actually pays and that we have some financial assurance. So
Thanks for that. That's excellent. And Bev, how do you see things going? Where do you want things to go in your territory?
Oh my goodness, wish I had a magic wand for my territory. Our territory is just covered with mining. And I like the quote from Joe Martin. He's a Tlayoqueat elder. And Joe says that Mother Earth will provide for your needs, but not your greed. And I think that says a lot. And it's important to realize that almost everything that contributes to climate change begins with resource extraction. And the natural laws of the land and the waters are being violated. And we end up with so much destruction of Mother Earth. And the evidence is everywhere, and it's overwhelming. Just in my territory, there's evidence in the wildlife in the form of diseased liver and organs. Salmon are disappearing, birds are disappearing, moose and caribou and other wildlife populations are drastically down. You know, it doesn't take a paper science degree to see the changes. And 40 years ago, the Indigenous people along the Fraser River tried to warn DFO that we were seeing disturbing changes in the salmon, but they wouldn't listen. And maybe if they did listen to us 40 years ago, you know, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in. But a big part of the problem is that too many are protected from experiencing the real changes in the environment. In my territory, a lot of the mines are out of sight, out of mind, you know, but too many people have air conditioning, they have filtered water, they buy their food from a grocery store. They don't really think about what it takes to keep the environment healthy. You know, and so as long as the food is being on the shelves of the grocery station, they're not going to give it too much more thought. Oh, the government is taking care of it. And convenience for humans creates all kinds of problems. But now, you know, with the lockdowns, we're seeing that we don't need all the crap we thought we needed before, and a lot of it comes from mining. And we really need to change the thinking about that. And I always tell mining companies that they should start mining in garbage dumps before they go to pristine areas. But until then, smoke and mirrors are used in big resource companies in their advertisements and in their public documents to justify the greed, the destruction, and the corruption of the mining industry. And it, you know, like whenever I watch things like the Academy Awards or some sports awards, I wonder if they know how destructive those little coveted gold-plated statues are to the environment. And I think that these celebrities need to educate themselves and to start using their voices to change things for the future of 7 generations ahead. And that's how I wish it was. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you. Thank you. HILU, how about you?
My conversation really flows on what Bev just said about greed and sustainability of resources. The mines that are operating here during the regulatory process arranged for an active committee for the terrestrial management. But despite that, unilaterally decided to change up the numbers for when they closed the roads. So I'm from Inland Inuit. We are not on the coast like many other all the other communities in Nunavut actually. And so they made this decision, and despite all the other people that are active members at this table, the government, the Inuit organization, and our Hunters and Trappers organization, they decided to change the numbers, and it's a smaller amount that allows, it needs to be a larger number of caribou that are present in order to close the roads. Otherwise, it's unsustainable. And you think about it from the Inuk's perspective, it's, you know, sustainability for us is being able to live off the caribou for generations to come. And so it's like that the extraction establishes themselves and creates a dependence and creates, you know, like creates the bodies necessary, the regulatory bodies that suits them, but then twists it to their needs. So I guess always having to manage that, even if the systems seem to be created and in place so that say caribou are protected, and in every other jurisdiction something else, you know, the water. And I guess it's just frustrating in that sense. That's my thoughts. Thanks, Jamie.
Well, thanks for that. And finally, over to Lewis.
Great, thank you. Yeah, very similar to what NIKKI was saying. We unfortunately have the free entry system here in the Yukon, which basically means that mining is seen as the first and best possible use of the land. It's leftover from when the first Europeans came up over 100 years ago. Certain areas have now been withdrawn, but it's still a good indication of how government and the mining companies view the land, and to a lesser degree the people. During COVID, mining was considered an essential service, so miners were still let in. A lot of the local communities, of course, were horrified and basically self-isolated themselves, even though there might be a mine right on their doorstep. The Yukon is slowly opening up, and we're relaxing the COVID sort of regulations and stuff, but it's very disconcerting that we prioritized gold mining over the health of our communities. I mean, the gold isn't going to go anywhere. It's not like going to, you know, be like a bit of cabbage and just, you know, bolt on you. So that was a big issue. We are fortunately in what's called the Yukon Mineral Development Strategy process, driven largely by the signing of modern day treaties with Yukon First Nations. There was a commitment to look at mining legislation. So we're in sort of a unique chance to basically chuck out some of this legislation, which is over 100 years old. To give you some idea, the placer mining legislation, basically the artisanal mining, their royalties are still only 37.5 cents an ounce. I think last year, the Yukon government took in $30,000 in placer gold royalties and over $500,000 in tourist campground fees. So, you know, by that logic, well, mining is pointless, but camping is great, which actually I personally agree with. If people want to get involved with the Yukon Mineral Development Strategy, just Google it. The government's got a bunch of websites set up. We've got some information on it. Seaports Yukon has some information on it. We encourage people to do a bit of research and send in their comments, especially if you're from the Yukon. We have this unique opportunity to rewrite or do successor legislation to our current mining legislation and be in a situation where we won't end up featured in one of Robert Lang's films as a bit of a horror story. So we encourage everyone to participate.
Thanks, Lewis. So there are things that people can do, things that people can get involved with very concretely, both in Yukon and in BC, in the Transboundary area and so on. That's really good to know. I'm going to turn now to some of the questions from the online audience here. I've got one for Bob in particular from Ozgun, and it says, the film focused on consumer choice and awareness more than it focused on larger systemic problems. I would love to see corruption and mining lobbies covered more. Are you thinking about making another film to talk about that more in depth?
Well, this is always the problem when you're making a film. What do you include and what don't you include? And we took the approach that we would tell human stories from the pipeline, from the gold mining pipeline. So from the artisanal up to the consumer side of it. So in short, no, we don't intend to make another film on that, even though it would be very interesting, and I'd love to see it myself, on corruption and mining lobbies. The difficulty, I'll tell you just a little inside story, is that we tried to even get, Imperial Metals, who run Mount Poly, to speak to us, and we gave them the opportunity to say whatever they wanted to say about the great job they were doing cleaning it up and how little damage had been done, or whatever they wanted to say. We gave them the opportunity in the film, and of course they declined. And no matter what we would do, I've convinced people around the world in many different industries to speak to us about many controversial subjects. I've never been treated quite the way they treated us, which was, no, we just will not talk. We want to control the message, is a quote from the head of communications there. We want to control the message. We don't want to speak to the public about some damage and something that we've done to the environment. We don't want to account for our behavior. We want to tell people what we want through our commercials and our well-managed messages. So yeah, we tried 3 or 4 times. So transposing that, if you can imagine trying to do a film on corruption and mining lobbies and try to speak to anyone about that, that would be rather difficult. So that's just a little note. I would love to see it too, and it's a different kind of film. It'd be more investigative, perhaps, and muckraking, journalistic, probably type of thing that you would hope from an investigative TV series.
Just on that a little bit, although not gold mining, there's just a great article about the recent changes to allow a lot of coal mining to happen in Alberta in previously protected areas, and the lobbying records were shown and indicated as a sort of key place of influence. So I think, as you said, in those sort of investigative journalist pieces, that tends to come out. But the mining industry, like here in British Columbia, tends to have a disproportionate influence compared to any kind of economic benefit, let alone economic cost or whatever. And part of it maybe stems from, we sort of have a bizarre nostalgia when it comes to mining, thinking that it really is more of that, going to Barkerville and having a gold pan and that kind of small scale, or the sort of settler, you know, who braved and went over. So I'm not sure if that's that influences that as well.
Yeah, I think there's a number of cans of worms that have just been opened. I mean, I was just looking at something the other day about the California gold rush and the thousands of tons of mercury that are still in the waterways of Northern California from the California gold rush, and how that, you know, moved in a matter of weeks from picking up nuggets out of stream beds to destroying the place. And, you know, and the evolution of placer mining and so on. But in terms of the political leverage, the power of the mining industry, well, don't get me started. I could go on for a long time about, you know, we look at the former prime ministers of Canada who've gone to work for law firms working for the mining industry in West Africa, and negotiating deals for mining companies and so on, using all of their political leverage. And, you know, it's hard to avoid the conclusion that there's a more than professional relationship there. So I don't know if other people want to comment briefly on that point before we move on. Lewis?
Sure, can I chime in? The Yukon, I mean, we know that various politicians of all political stripes, you know, regularly meet with mining executives and mining company representatives. Yet the Yukon has passed lobbying legislation, but never implemented it. So we have decent lobbying legislation on the books, but it's toothless. So we have no idea who or what is meeting with our elected representatives, discussing who knows what. Fortunately, the YCS office is only 2 blocks away from the government offices. So all we have to do is look out the windows and see the fancy cars out front, and we get a good idea of what's going on. But it shouldn't be like that. The idea that if you're a big multinational gold company, you can go and sweet talk to the politicians that are regulating and legislating your business without the public being aware is wrong. And there should be a public record of this. And in the Yukon, and I can't speak for any other jurisdiction, we just don't have that, and it has to change.
That's one of the problems of everything, you know, the way things operate. When after Mount Poly happened, and we managed to get a table with the government, and one of the first things they wanted us to do was sign a confidentiality agreement. And Chief Anne Louie and I absolutely refused to sign a confidentiality agreement, because we said, what happened here is a concern to everybody down the river and up the river and all around Quesnel and Horsefly. And so, you know, that's another different way that they do it in the Indigenous way. If you have a potlatch or a ceremony of some sort, everybody knows what's going on, but governments are too quick to sign the confidentiality agreement to keep everything. And you wonder, you know, like, there were things that we thought about at that table, and you know, having it public made it easier to win the fight. And so I really don't like it when Indigenous groups especially are made to sign confidentiality agreements, because it affects everybody.
Yeah, and it's really to your point, Jamie, too, that these laws are so old. And, you know, and then Canada, and in Alaska, but also, you know, Canada, but it's not, again, hyperbole to say half the world's mining companies are in British Columbia. You know, it's crazy. And so when you have so many companies, but then they're also working with very antiquated laws, and you're just hoping it's just low-hanging fruit, you would think, for the federal government to get involved, but they don't want to get involved either. And that's been one of our frustrations. We've been trying to get the International Joint Commission to act. You know, they've worked along what to us is the southern border, but it's the northern border of the United States, of Michigan, Montana, you know, different states down there. the IJC has stepped in, but they haven't in Alaska. And in talking to them, they seem reluctant to. And so, well, geez, if the guys who are supposed to act won't act, what do you do? You know, the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909, this is old. This is old stuff. And they should be acting on it. But then it's sort of ironic when a native group is complaining that a federal treaty isn't being honored. You know, it's like, gee, what a news story that is, right? But yeah, this is that's why, you know, another, back to the film, you know, it's very powerful for people. Where does your gold come from? You know, we're so out of touch. Where do your strawberries come from? Where do your oranges come from? That's, you know, it's one of those unintended consequences. No one likes this disease or anything, or being forced to, not forced, but staying home. You know, well, you start to see shortages. People like, oh God, they run and get toilet paper. Well, where does that toilet paper come from? Do you need toilet paper? You know, where do your strawberries come from? Or where do your tomatoes? That's why people grow their own tomatoes. You know, there's a lot of things, you know, do we need this gold? You know, it's really interesting. It's like movies that when you grew up, cartoons would parody this kind of thing. The guy with his right hand is creating a need. Look, you want this, kid? Look. Oh, you want it, kid? Here, you can buy it. You know, it's like the same guy selling you this need is the guy, oh, look, I've got it for you. You know, we need to look behind the curtain more, you know, and see what the Wizard of Oz is up to.
Thanks, Frederick. There was also a question, there was another question, a very precise one for Robert about the film and about whether the area around the Yellowstone mine that was being staked for mining, was that actually in the park or in the protected area?
Yeah, it was outside of the park, but it was upstream from the park, and the waterways led right into Yellowstone. That was an interesting story because we didn't get into the detail, but there are other examples of this. First of all, Yellowstone is iconic in American history. It's first national park in the US and so on. So it has an iconic stature, and anything that would threaten Yellowstone actually got huge amount of support, you know, from quite a variety of interests, from the most right-wing people to more progressive environmental types. So the fellow in the film with the long beard, he was a Trump supporter. And a Republican, but feels very strongly about trying to keep the mine out. And he actually was pro-mining before he actually saw what the effect was, or what the effect could be in his community. And all of a sudden, you know, pretty much within 2-3 years, he became quite an active environmentalist once he realized, you know, this is his backyard, and not only his backyard, but his Yellowstone Park, which was his, you know, source of income and source of comfort and you know, very much a part of his life. So he became an environmentalist only when it was really clear that it was on his back doorstep. And I hope the film, that's what that the film shows that once people realize that people's lives and livelihoods and environment are wrapped up in gold mining as much as they are, they won't see it as being out there somewhere. It's actually something that involves us and affects us all. Because living downstream, there are many, as Bev knows better than I, living downstream of Mount Polley, there's a lot of waterways, and there are a lot of potential impacts that we still don't know. We still don't know the exact impact of what that mine disaster, the tailings pond disaster was, how it impacted people and the fish and environments. So Yellowstone is an interesting example. I wish that it would, I guess it up in your, not quite your area, Fred, but the Bristol Bay mine up a little further up there has a similar interesting convergence of interests from the most business-oriented right-wing. Ah, there we are, Pebble Mine. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, so one would hope that we could get more people involved from all different ends of the spectrum who have an interest in the environment and in human rights, and that it isn't a matter of left or right, that it's really a matter of protecting our cherished world, our environment, and people's lives.
Thank you for that. I'm realizing that we've reached the top of the hour. We didn't tell people we would go over an hour, and I think we should probably move to wrap up. We did have a couple of questions that I guess we won't have time to get to relating to small-scale mining and what alternatives there are for the millions of people who are dependent on small-scale mining around the world. So we'll leave that question hanging. And also there's some other questions about the technology and where mercury is used, where cyanide is used, and so on. Again, we'll unfortunately, I think we'll have to leave those questions aside. But this session has been recorded and it will be available online. We don't know exactly how long it will take to get that ready or where that will be, but it will be posted on the film's website, theshadowofgold.com. And Lewis is saying people are welcome to email him directly, mining@yukonconservation.org, if they're interested in following up with any of those issues. And also the Facebook page for the film, The Shadow of Gold. Just search for The Shadow of Gold on Facebook and you'll see the updates, any updates about future showings, whether they're in person or online, any of the other discussions that we're hoping to convene in other parts of the country around these same issues. And again, so just go to shadowofgoldfilm.com or the Facebook page for updates. And again, I would like to thank you all for participating. Frederick is showing us some amazing looking fish.
Oh. Salmon, is it?
It's making me very hungry. Yeah. And yeah, so again, thanks to all of you for participating. Thank you to those of you in the audience for tuning in, for watching the film, for engaging, and thanks for your questions. And I hope this has been as interesting and entertaining for all of you as it has been for us.
One last thing about the website, sorry, Jamie, but there is an area in the website, on the website, that does have other resources, how to connect with other resources out there, that to connect people and take action, I think is the area of the website that has those further resources.
Great, thanks very much, Robert.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Lewis.
Thanks,
thank
Bob,
you,
for
HILU.
making
Thank
the
you,
film.
Frederick.
Thanks,
Thank you, NIKKI.
Thanks,
Thank
Bob.
you, Bev.
Thank you all.
See you. Hello.
All right, take care all.